Okay, and we're back. So I need everybody to start on a new set of page. I don't want you guys to do this continuing, even if you have space. I want you to start on a new page. And you're gonna call it Neurons Notes number 2. Um, and we're gonna start, even though this is kind of like a review on part of the other one, that's okay, because the more we write it, the better it is. So there are different types of neurons. We kind of talked, this is all part of our central nervous system. And the first one is our sensory neurons, also called afferent neurons or nerves. And that one is that it is the one that receives information from the senses and sends it to the brain. Okay. Then we have the next one, which is the motor neuron, which is also called efferent. And this one is it receives information from the brain and sends it out to the motor functions of the body. Okay, so the sensory goes in and then the motor kind of comes out. And then the interneuron is the one that connects and helps the afferent and efferent. They work together. Um, Under the interneuron, I do want you to write down mirror neurons. And again, mirror neurons are basically when you are watching something, somebody do something, or you're just watching, yeah, I guess pretty much just watching something else, or even thinking about it, believe it or not, mirror neurons are activated. So it's kind of like these neurons. Um, that are like they mirror each other, mirror the actual neuron that could have been activated, so those get activated. And it's interesting, but and again, here's the thing with this unit, there is still a lot of research, and then like they'll have one research like one year and then another they're like, well, maybe not like that, or it goes a little bit more in depth. So mirror neurons are actually one that um they're doing a lot of research on because it's so fascinating. Because literally the neurons that need to be fired are being fired even though you're not actually physically doing it. Okay, so that's basically, we'll talk a little bit more in class. And the glial cells, and I spelled that wrong here, so it's GLI. Ignore that. This is the one that nourishes and protects the neurons in order for them to run smoothly. Um, and also, just so you know, it's kind of like a glue. So the glial cells are the ones that also help glue the neurons together. Okay, like when we're talking about that long-term potentiation, when we make those connections, and the more we do something, the stronger those connections between the neurons. The glia cells are the ones that are going to help stick that together. Okay, and the healthier you are, the stronger those cells are. All right, here comes to the nitty-gritty, the specialized cell structure. And I will say you will see this little design here a lot. And I'll move it here to the side. You may want to draw it. I am going to give you a couple, and there's some worksheets that you will get that will have the drawing. But just for the sake of like the notes, you're going to want to draw it. It doesn't need to be perfect, but just so you could label it and know what they are. So like for instance, I want you to draw it out. And this is what's called the dendrites. So these are the little branches out. Those are the dendrites. You have your cell body, which is what has your nucleus, right? And then you have your axon, which is all of this down there. All of this, this is your axon. And the axon is actually, you don't see it, but it's, it's a kind of like a cord. I always think of your charger. Your charger, the inside is the electrical, where the electrical impulses go through, and then it's protected by whatever that's called, like a plastic. It's not plastic, but whatever that's called. I do not know the exact things, but I do know the name of what's protecting the axon, and that is the myelin sheet. And I know that you guys have heard this already before, hopefully, because I have mentioned it. And the myelin sheet is basically that fatty cell that's around the axon. And then it moves on over here. And here we have our terminal branches. then you'll see you have terminal buttons, and then you'll see what's inside of there. Okay, so let's start with the first one, which is their cell body. So I'm not sure how you want to do it after your drawing, if you want to do it on the side, like write it on the side, or if you want to do like how I did here, cell body, I'll write the information there. This is up to you. These are your notes. Just make sure you have them organized so you could find them, okay? So the cell body, I'm going to start here, is basically what contains your nucleus. And inside your nucleus is your DNA. So I find it fascinating how we have billions of these neurons in our system, and every single one has a nucleus with our our genetics in there. So it's really cool, our DNA. And this is what you need the cell body in order for the neurons to grow and maintain itself. Okay, now you have the dendrites, where the little things on the outside here, kind of like branches that you see, or roots. And these are what protects the neuron. Okay, so these are protectors of neurons. And more importantly, they are the ones that receive information from other cells. Okay, so they're going to receive information from other cells. So like, for instance, you need to understand that this is just one neuron. We have billions. So they are all pretty much like hanging around in the same area. The same area, but you get it. And then what happens is that this dendrite is going to receive information from another neuron, right? Which is basically the ending of this one, of another neuron. Okay, we'll talk more. You guys are gonna make, it's my favorite little section. You guys are gonna make these lovely neurons out of candy, because more candy is needed here. Okay, so the dendrite receives the information, and at this point it's an electrical impulse. They receives it, it sends it through your cell body, goes through here, and it goes through the axon. Okay, so the axon is basically the one that carries information away from the cell body. Okay, so it carries information away from the cell body, and it sends it towards other neurons, right? So this is all an axon, all of this, okay? And then its goal is to send it off to the next one. It's kind of like a domino effect, is how I always think of it, like little dominoes. Trigger one and they go down slowly, right? Or fast. Same thing with here. Now, the axon is covered because this is an electrical impulse coming through here. It needs to be protected. And the way that it is protected is through the myelin sheet. Myelin sheet is fatty tissue that insulates the axon. Okay, so it's an insulator. You guys are, your healthiest myelin sheet ever is now during your adolescence. So this is why you guys can process information so much faster, because your myelin sheet is intact. Okay, as you start getting older, that myelin sheet starts deteriorating. Okay, and there are certain even autoimmune diseases that actually attack the myelin sheet. So it's kind of like when you get your charger, right? Many times, especially at the end where you put in the phone, that starts like deteriorating, right? Like the little plastic thing, the rubber thing that goes around it starts falling apart, and then you start seeing like the wiring. So what ends up happening for like neurons and just like chargers, that electrical impulse can't safely get by. So it's like it stops, right? Or short circuits within this neuron. So then the next neuron that's waiting for the signal can never get it, because the myelin sheet is not there to allow the impulse to go through. Okay, but since you guys, your myelin sheet is super healthy, the electrical impulse is gonna get through here, and it's gonna go to your terminal branches. Okay, now I do have here like neural structure, because entire section is kind of like where the electrical impulse happens. Um, but it's kind of like everywhere. So don't worry too much about neural structure if you don't want to write that down, but you can definitely write soma, which the soma is basically the body of the nerve cell, okay? And it has, which is right here, by the way. The soma is this little circle thing, which has your nucleus and the cell body. Like this whole thing is the soma, okay? Um, so I kind of like went back, and that's okay. But most importantly, as the electrical impulse goes through the axon, it's going to end up in the terminal branches. Okay, so the terminal branches are branches that connect to other dendrites. Basically, it's kind of like sends a signal out, and its job is to like connect to the next dendrite, right? These over here. Now in these terminal buttons, and I don't think I have, yes, I do have a more intact. So this is like a terminal button. This is the ending of, I mean, if I zoom in here, right? These would be the terminal buttons. Inside those terminal buttons is there are little chemicals. Okay, so make sure to write that down in those terminal buttons. They're chemicals. Um, and they're being held in what's called vesicles, right? So the vesicles are like a little pouch that holds these chemicals inside the buttons that are at the ends of the branches, okay? Now, these little chemicals that are in the vesicles, they are called neurotransmitters, all right? Now, neurotransmitters are the chemicals, basically the chemicals that are going to um, carry the information from one cell to the next. Okay, so let me explain a little bit. So this is your, right here, you will see this is like the ending of the terminal buttons, right? They're here. And in here, there'll be what's a vesicle. And in that vesicle here is inside those are the neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are in there, little chemicals. It's the good ones. And what happens is that when the electrical impulse comes through here, we'll go a little bit more in detail in class, it's going to shoot out these neurotransmitters, the chemicals, right, that are in these vesicles, in the sacs. Some of them come in sacs. And there is what's called a synaptic cleft or synapse. Synapse is fine. And a synapse is a small gap between the neurons. They do not touch each other, even though it seems like they're touching, they're not. There's a small little gap. And in that gap is where these chemicals, neurotransmitters, they come out, okay, of there. They come out in these little areas right here in the synaptic gap, okay, in the synapse. Now, this right over here that you see in green, this is another dendrite that's waiting. Like those little branches that you guys saw over here, it's waiting, right? For this, like another neuron over here to shoot off its little neurotransmitters. So it's waiting here. And the dendrite is going to have receptors, okay? And they have like little entrance, like little gates. And then when the electrical impulse comes through, it shoots out the chemicals. The chemicals hang out in this open area here, and then the dendrite receives it. Now, any of these chemicals that are not picked up from the next dendrite, they don't just hang out there. They actually go back in to the terminal button. Okay, and that's what's called, I'll write it here, reuptake. Okay, and I'm gonna just drop that little seed there because we'll go a little bit more in detail, because you do need to know like the chemical components of what happens when the electrical impulse comes through the neuron, but we will get to that. Okay? And ladies and gentlemen, record timing, that is done. We'll come back to this in class. I love you guys.